A new business, the plat, SUB 20-15 first, since we have Ms. Margaret on the line with us, and then we'll come back to the small homes ordinance after that. That sound okay? And Suzanne, you're going to lead us off on that?
Yes, this is a plat, preliminary subdivision plat, SUB 20-15. This was previously approved at the December 6, 2016 meeting of the Planning Commission, and the vested rights expired after 2 years. And then, of course, last week you saw the minor amendment that slightly tweaked the transition where the public to private right-of-way was located. So that's part of this plat. That's one of the changes. So this plat creates the new name of the road is Waterway Hills Parkway, as opposed to Grand Dunes North Boulevard. It creates that right of way, and it creates one major record and a pump station lot. At the time that we sent this out, Public Works was still reviewing it, and we're having, I think pretty much everything is okay. Oh, planning staff, there's one thing, when you approve this plat, you need to review the tree mitigation exhibit. That's the next page, I believe, in this packet, because you're approving the removal of those trees with this plat. And it's within your purview to make tweaks to that design if you think that it would save some trees. And then the other issue is we're having some discussion about the maintenance of the fire access roads. And I think Aaron knows more about that because he's dealt with the county on it more. He may want to speak to.
Right. So this is a major, well, this is a large concern with our chief fire marshal and maintaining safe access along that Coquina Dirt Road that we spoke about previously when we looked at the amendment. So there's one access, emergency access being provided that would connect to this Coquina Road. It's indicated on the plat as a 50-foot, what is it called? The 50-foot, it's right up there in that corner. It's 50-foot maintenance, 50-foot easement, and there's a plat book and page reference to it. And it was our initial understanding, talking with L-Star, that it was likely owned by the county. Well, not maybe owned, but at least maintained by the county. And since speaking to the county, actually speaking to Andy Markunis, the engineer at the county, he says, no, that's actually not the case. They do not maintain it. They don't own it either. They don't own it. They don't maintain it. So it kind of leaves that as a question mark. Who is maintaining it? And then how do we ensure that it continues to be maintained? So it's been brought up today for the discussion. We have since reached out to our Kevin Blayton, our Public Works Director, as well as Dana Hamilton, to try to get their understanding of what this easement is, and if it is not being maintained by the county, would the city be in a position to accept it and then maintain it? So that's kind of where we are today.
Can we have Dawn or somebody run the cursor along that easement so everybody knows exactly what we're talking about?
This would give that second exit or entrance for emergency vehicles. And this proposal came in prior to us saying you had to have at minimum 2 exits and entrances.
Right.
And so therefore we can't say that, you know, you have to have it. And yet on the other side of the coin, we have to have an emergency exit or entrance. And this becomes a real problem when you talk about how many dwellings are proposed here.
The road exists on the ground. It's there. It's it's in very passable condition. It's usable by emergency services. What's not clear is the ownership and control and maintenance of that easement. And so what we want to do is make sure that that gets buttoned down somehow, some way to be sure that in the future it's preserved and it never goes away. Or, you know, if half of it is on Cote's property and half of it is on L-Star, we don't want one party closing half of it off. You know, we've just got to take some sort of positive measures to make sure that that easement is maintained and preserved by some entity, some public entity. So we're trying to work out the details of that with these discussions with Public Works.
Well, where does that leave the planning commission?
Well, it's coming up as part of the discussion on today's plat, because there's an exhibit associated with this submittal that shows that emergency access. And it's, there's a connection, but is it specifically tied to the plat, the Spine Road plat that you're looking at here? No. I don't know that there's a direct correlation to it, a direct connection. Does it matter? Is it important in terms of the overall development of this property? Yes. So, see, because right here, just for everybody's understanding, can somebody, Dawn or maybe Allison, cursor over the Water Tower Road 50-foot Horry? See, it says 50-foot Horry County maintenance easement to the right of where your cursor is. By one of those circles, those three circles to the right, it's right next to the middle circle. To your other, yeah. And there's a water tower right there, right in there. Yeah, that's this easement that I'm referring to, and again, there's a plat book and page reference to it.
I have a question.
Yes, it's showing up on this plat. Yes.
Yeah, the question is, what's our definition of a second entrance? I mean,
Well, in this particular case, what was negotiated during the planning commission and city council approval is that they would have a secondary and a tertiary emergency access only. There'd be like a Knox gate that could be opened in the event of an emergency by the public safety department, and people could exit the community on two different ways. One at the bottom of the community where it was originally going to tie into Grand Dunes, but there will be no vehicular connection between the two now, but that emergency connection will occur there. And the other one extends over approximately the middle of the plat and hits that 50-foot easement, or that Coquina Road, separating Donna Cote's property and L-Star's property. So, you know, this was entitled and reviewed and approved years before we had the multiple access ordinance. So we negotiated the two emergency connections, even though they weren't required to do it. But they were willing to give us the two emergency connections in order to satisfy the fire marshal.
okay, but the emergency exits now, aren't they required to at least go out onto public right of way?
I don't think the ordinance specifies that.
I can check. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think it does.
I don't think it does. It just needs to be a functioning way in and out. But right now, that one exit does dump onto an existing Coquina Road, and our concern is to make sure that that road does not ever go away. And the reason we have that concern is because the ownership and maintenance history of that doesn't seem to be all that settled. So we're trying to settle that. Now, what Aaron suggested was that it's not directly related to the plat for this Spine Road, because the Spine Road does not physically touch that road. It will in later phases, when they come in for subdivision approval of later phases, that's where that emergency access road comes into play. So maybe one solution until we can clean up the ownership situation is maybe to remove reference to that, that 50-foot easement off of this plat. Or you can just say that your approval, it's not a condition, but it's a clarification statement. You can say your approval is for the spine road only, and that your approval makes no reference or makes no, I guess, gives no status or standing to the condition of that easement.
In our last plan review on this track, we had already approved it to a certain extent from what I remember. And wasn't that in those emergency exits? I remember that being an issue then, and it seems that we accepted it. Is that the case, or is my memory wrong?
I don't believe that issue came up back in 2016.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, the only thing I remember is Park Point, I think, or
Yes,
Yeah.
we
That's
talked
when-
about that emergency exit, but I don't remember talking about emergency exit
Right.
on this parcel.
no.
Really, the only change in this spine road, between 2016 and now is that a small portion of it from the traffic circle, I don't know, roughly 900, 1,000 feet, something like that, is going to be public because that public portion accesses the multifamily component in the upper left corner.
Right.
Whereas, and then the rest of it will be private, whereas before it was all private.
We did discuss it at the last meeting as part of the major amendment, I believe.
Yeah, and this is Callie. Whenever I asked last week if the fire marshal had approved that, moving the entrances and everything looked okay to the fire marshal with the road not being paved. You guys said, yes, he was okay with it. And then now it's saying that he's not okay with it and we don't know who's going to maintain it. So one of my main concerns is that who's going to maintain it, who's going to have to pay for it. And yeah, we're not talking about the spine road, but we are talking about emergency access to the property. And that would be a major concern for me, especially if fire marshal is not okay with it.
Well, let me clarify one thing. The fire marshal is fine with the connection points that were established last meeting. He has no concern about where those are located and the number of them. What we're concerned about at the staff level is making sure that road, that fire exit ties into, that road is protected and never goes away. So it's just a matter of cleaning up the ownership and maintenance of that easement and making sure that we put ourselves in a position where that road is never compromised or never goes away. So that's what we're trying to work out.
And see, we as staff, we may be able to come to a better understanding by tonight's meeting. I'll have a chance, this has just come up really since Friday and into yesterday. So I'll have a chance to speak to Kevin and Dana after the meeting, hopefully, so we can talk more about his understanding of this roadway. That would help. And also I want to add that Andy Markunis, county engineer, had said that he'd given me minutes from a 2018 meeting that the county council had. And in those minutes, it's written that the developer had requested the county relieve their maintenance responsibilities of that roadway and that they would actually do it instead. But what I don't know, and it's a bit ambiguous, I don't know what portion of the roadway the minutes are referring to. There's a distance quoted in there, but I don't know if that means this exact maintenance roadway or some other portion of the roadway that the developer was wanting to take over. That I needed some more clarification on that too. It could very well be this roadway, and if it is this roadway, and if it is the developer who actually made the request to the county in 2018 to maintain it, and the county said, well, that's fine, you can maintain it, we don't need it. That may mean dual ownership. That may mean, because the way this roadway comes down, it may mean it's possibly L-Star, but I know that they have their position that they don't own it. And then there's also Donna Cote next door, and she may have maintenance responsibilities for it and doesn't realize it. I don't know. So it's a little, it's very confusing. Hopefully I have some more information for everybody at tonight's meeting, and then, you know, we can see where we get to.
Well, I'm always opposed to conditioning any approval by the commission, but in this particular case, it's just confusing.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the commission may decide is to approve or disapprove this particular plat condition upon this road emergency exit be cleared up, because right now it's, you know, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, that could be a mess.
If you were inclined to approve based on any condition at tonight's meeting, I would recommend that would be a satisfactory condition that you would apply, that this gets cleaned up.
It has to.
sorted
I mean,
out. Yeah.
I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel, but of course I have some other questions regarding the plat, but if the commissioners feel that, okay, other than this one item, we could approve it based upon this being cleared up prior to construction or permits or whatever the case may be.
Or maybe even say by final plat.
I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel on this particular item. I have some other questions regarding 747 trees to be removed, but I'm a tree lover, so I have some real.
Harvey, on the emergency exits, I agree with you. I don't like the conditional approvals, but let's see what the staff can come back with by tonight, if they can somehow lock down or clear up the confusion that we have right now.
I just have one question. This is Ruth Ann. On this, it's mandatory that they have this exit. If it's not gated, wouldn't the city have to be responsible for the road? Or is that not a part of this? Am I not seeing something?
I don't think the city necessarily has to be responsible for maintenance of the road. That could be done privately, but what we want to make sure is that we have some protections in place where, let's say, for example, the road straddles the property line and half of it is on L-Star's piece and half of it is on Donna Cote's piece. We want some legal assurances to be sure that one or both parties doesn't suddenly say, you know what, I'm just not going to take care of that anymore, and then it falls into a state of disrepair. So we've just got to have the proper assurances, whether that be some maintenance agreement between the city and the property owners, or if that easement could be quit claim to the city and the city could take it over. There's a couple of different ways it can be handled. We just want to make sure that it does get handled.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, everybody. That was my question was, how long is that access road again? I'm sorry. I think I missed that.
I don't know that we know that, Harry, offhand.
It's, I've got it right here. It's 5,642 feet.
Okay. Is the city in any position to where they would want the owners to actually dedicate it to the city to become an actual city maintained right of way? That would be the most concrete step to take for future, you know, anything like that, to where they would dedicate it to the city rather than leaving it in the hands of, you know, two owners with just an easement. And then, you know, like you're saying, something happens and one owner says, well, you know, but then again, the city might not want the responsibility of, you know, all that becoming public right of way.
That's the question that we're posing to our public works staff. Do we want to take over ownership and maintenance of that easement? So we'll have an answer to that by tonight.
Right, because the county's position on a lot of things is they don't want any more right of ways. They don't want anything else until they get paved, you know, existing roads and keep the upkeep, you know, as far as what they already have.
Yes, sir.
Normally the county doesn't.
And that maybe Margaret might have some insights on this if she has anything to add to this discussion right at this point. She's still there?
Margaret, are you there?
Margaret, you need to unmute your,
I wanted to unmute and got
Okay.
a bit faster on the mouse. Yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity on this this access, and so I would like to weigh in with staff so we're prepared to have a clear path moving forward when we go tonight for approval. And I think it is important that we really define what it is, because we're at a holding pattern. We don't own the road. It's not on our property. It was maintained when it was the golf course for access to the golf maintenance by Horry County. And I understand that that was years ago, and maybe individuals are no longer at the county to either reference that or have records to know that. And so that was always how we had approached the site planning of our parcel, that this would be continue to have that maintenance. And so to me, selfishly, as the developer, quit claiming it to the city and making it a public right-of-way, I think is the appropriate action. I think there is an opportunity for us to share in the cost for maintenance. I think that's fair without burdening the city. But I do think it's a bigger conversation that we have to have. I probably need to have my attorney weigh in, simply because we have the adjacent property owner who has, probably not aware, like Jim had mentioned, some ownership rights or maintenance rights to it as well. I don't think she's developed her parcel and site planned it. So I don't think she knows right now what she needs. And so we probably need to bring her into the loop or make decisions for her that benefit us so we can move forward with our site plan.
Now, bear in mind, again, that connection, the emergency connection to that right of way or easement is only going to occur in a future phase. So this discussion could be deferred until we get to that future phase, and we could make it clear that the Plan Commission is acting only on the spine road at this point. But it will absolutely have to be cleared up before any future phases go forward.
I can
Correct.
agree with that. My comment to that would be, taking a longer term view of this, eventually that parcel, the adjacent parcel, is going to be developed also. And so somebody, somehow, some way is going to have to do something with that road. So I don't have any doubt that eventually it'll be a full-fledged paved road used by both parcels. But when that'll happen under current conditions, I don't know. But I think, taking a longer term vision of it, it's going to go that way anyway. But I agree with you, Jim. I think maybe that's the way to go.
Okay. Can you all see my cursor? That larger white?
Yeah, right here. Can you see that?
They may not be able to see that because screen share is on another computer.
Okay.
We can share our screen though, Jim. I think we can hit that green button down there. Oh, okay, it's disabled.
Okay.
I also wanted to say that this is just the preliminary plat for this. It's already been approved. A lot of the infrastructure has already been installed. And this will still have to go to final plat before anything's recorded at the county. So we do have a little bit of leeway on that side.
Yeah, we have some time before it goes to final plat to work this out.
But as far as the planning commission goes, we could approve it with a condition based upon the final plan. But I have some other concerns besides the road, and that's the amount of trees that are going to be.
Let's
Take it
talk
out.
about that.
Margaret, I guess, has a question.
Oh, yeah.
I do. I just want to just for everyone's understanding, what Suzanne mentioned in the beginning, the Platte Road was approved and our vested rights expired. So I just want to make it clear that this road has been rocked, all infrastructure, dry and wet utilities are in, it's rocked, curb is practically down. And so this is just a preliminary sort of housekeeping review because the trees have been mitigated and that road is in. And maybe you can explain a little bit further of what really the intent is today on that spine road for the purposes of proceeding with the completion of the road, which is probably, I'm going to say 30% from being paved.
Wow.
Yeah.
The vested rights expire after 2 years to allow us to make sure that any changes to our land development regulations are accommodated in plats as development occurs. And so I think we really wanted the fire marshal to review this based on the hydrant spacing and let's see, which he has, and to review any updated construction drawings that needed to be reviewed. But as all that infrastructure has really been installed mainly, it is more of a paper exercise in terms of that, just to make sure that all the development is still occurring with the proper approvals in place.
So the trees were addressed when it was originally entitled.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And just a clarification to the chairman, not 747 trees. There are 20, I think that's 24 plus 2, 26 trees total that were affected. 2 of those are remaining today. 24 of those were taken away, mitigated. The 747 number was that's the total to be removed.
Number of inches.
I'm sorry, the number of caliper inches.
Oh, okay.
And then
Okay.
they show us what that requirement was to mitigate, and then what they provided. So the numbers there actually are higher than the provided in the new trees on that bottom
Mhm.
graphic with the green
Right,
dots. Those are the new trees, the street trees that would be responsible for mitigating, or they're the mitigated trees, and
okay.
that would be more than what was.
I guess where I'm coming from is I'm really opposed to clear cutting. And I've seen too much clear cutting in subdivisions, Robert's Roost, and I can name some others. I'm very concerned about trying to maintain some sort of trees that should remain, and maybe a road has to be changed just a little bit in order to save a couple of trees. To me, that's worthwhile. I understand from a developer standpoint, it's a lot quicker, easier, and economically feasible to go in and clear cut. And I'm really opposed to that. So I would hope that the developer understands that from my standpoint, and I don't know, I'm not speaking for any of the other commissioners, but from my standpoint, that's very, very important.
Right, and we would have had the opportunity to do that level of review had this been a brand new road being proposed for the first time, but this is the road that's already on the
I
ground.
understand.
Now you get another shot at this ponds.
Right.
The plat that will come in will resemble similar to this exhibit, but those trees, although they did get approval from BZA to cut on the private side, you'll be able to weigh in on the public right of way or necessary infrastructure trees.
That's fine with me.
So Aaron, this is Callie. I couldn't quite hear you. Based off of what we did 2 weeks ago, we were letting BZA weigh in on what? Because I thought they were the ones that were going to look at this and then come back to us with suggestions.
Yeah, they were looking at the private trees.
Okay, not the access road.
We're just the right of way.
Gotcha.
Well, yeah, the primary access road is already
Yeah,
in
basically.
on the ground, and
Right.
this is more of a paper exercise to re-entitle it.
Right.
Okay, so all of the trees that were in red have already been removed and the green ones just have not been planted yet. Is that correct?
Margaret, I believe that's correct, yes?
Yeah, maybe Cam can explain, because we did keep some trees. You see these medians in the middle of the spine road? Those are existing trees. Cam, would you like to weigh in?
Sure.
please?
The mitigated trees, the street trees proposed on the bottom portion of this plan will be installed at the end of construction. That would be 384 cumulative dBH. We haven't installed those yet just because the road is not complete.
So us looking at this is pointless because all these trees have already been cut. And from the ones up top, the red ones, those are gone. We have 2 green trees in the median that were saved, and then the rest of them were eliminated. And then the others on the below graph will be planted. Is that?
Yeah,
The-
this is a paper exercise to verify code compliance.
But the exhibit you're looking at does have meaning because that bottom image would show you the future street trees once they completed the improvement to the roadway.
All right, so the primary tree cutting issue with this spine road was addressed in 2016. And then the road was partially constructed. The entitlement expired, so now we're re-upping that entitlement.
Okay, so, all right. So there's nothing we can do about this. So we just need to go ahead and approve it because it's already been done, correct?
That is correct, as far as I'm concerned.
All right, so next thing, let's move on. That would be my suggestion.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Whatever's next on the agenda, that's fine by me.
I believe we addressed everything that we needed to on the staff's side.
So what I would suggest for tonight is make a motion to approve the preliminary plat with the condition that the ownership of the fire emergency road be settled before it goes to final plat.
Any comments
Is-
from the commissioners?
Was there anything in there about the additional, the apartments up front? Are we approving those whenever we approve this tonight?
No,
Conditional?
that got approved by you in the major PDD amendment, and last night at first reading in council that got approved. How it affects this plat is that the first, 900 or 1,000 feet of the road from the roundabout is now going to be public as opposed to private, where in 2016 when it was entitled, it was going to be private.
Okay,
Okay, any other questions or comments by any of the commissioners? Okay, let's move on then, Aaron.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, we'll circle back to old business 5A. That's our small home, single family and common developments. So this is, we're bringing this back. It's been on the table for a few meetings now. But we wanted to, so I wanted to say that since we put forward the first draft, we have raised the minimum lot size to 2.5 acres. We are requiring guest parking, and we committed to required landscaping, curb, and sidewalks internally. And you should see that in your draft that we gave you. We also provided the explanation of what common open space is and is not, and I hope that was clarified. The remaining concerns that have been brought up to staff since we last looked at this earlier in the month had to do with enclosing elevated homes, the homes that are elevated, enclosing that space underneath that main level with solid or louvered walls or both at the ground level, perimeter homes, and orientation to the primary street, and foundation landscaping. And so we're staff's amenable to these suggestions, and even more so, we put them in the draft as that yellow text that you're looking at there. So let's discuss what that is. And before I forget too, what I want to do, let's maybe now might be the best time. I took a video of Isle Cottages and I wanted to show it to everybody. It's about 5 minutes. But Isle Cottages is the neighborhood that we've actually looked at our first workshop. And many of commission liked the images of the street view, the landscaping. Yeah, this is it. So this will give you a real good perspective of what our small home in common might look like built, right? Utilize the ordinance and then built. So go ahead and hit that. Okay, so this is me. This is a windshield tour headed into Isle Cottages in Carolina Forest. And you come in, it's about 7 acres. There are 99 units within this development. You can see a mix of elevated and at ground and ground level, both sides of the street. Parking on street as well as in the underneath the elevated structures and garages, single car garages. You have foundation landscaping that you see there. You have both sides sidewalk, although it's intermittent. One side might not have it through the driveways, the other side does, and then it'll pick back up both sides. Curb, gutter. This compares to our common open space requirement at about 15 to 16%. And of course, ours in our draft is 15%. The buildings are 10 feet apart, minimum separations. That's what our draft would have. There are some spots for additional guest parking, although they're not assigned. To me, it looked like they were excess guest parking spaces. You notice the architecture too. Every one of these is a hardy plank building material composite. I should say just hardy plank, but it's a cement fiberboard composite. It's got the board and batten. It's got interesting, features on the outsides to kind of improve the aesthetic. The colors are nice. They're similar to, I think, what I've envisioned, at least for our draft and what we're looking for here in North Myrtle Beach. The raised, the elevator are all enclosed. You can see all of those are enclosed, and there's a mixture of either fully enclosed or enclosed with partial louvered walls. If you don't know what a louvered wall is, it's like boards running across that don't exactly, they don't physically touch. So there's air and light between them. So it provides privacy, but it's also open.
Yeah, from the inside, you can see out, but from the outside, you can't see in.
Thank you, yes. Also, the porches, notice every one of these has a porch. It's either just about the entire width of the front facade, or it's raised like you see in the elevated above. That's a little different. See, ours, we talk about needing coverage over the front, making a porch or a portico, but we don't specifically say you have to have a porch that stretches the entire or most of the width of the front facade. That's something to think about. You saw a little glimpse of the extra storage units that they have in here. My assumption is that each section of this development would have access to a door as part of that storage building, and they can store their lawn chairs and little stuff like that. Our beach chairs, like beach chairs, umbrellas, whatever they need.
Hey, Aaron.
Yeah.
What's the square footage of these buildings that we're looking at?
Okay, so they're the footprint elevation in width. There are two different dimensions: 17 feet and 24 feet. I don't know the exact square footages, but I'm thinking it's around. Maybe the smallest are around 500, well, probably more like 600, maybe a little bit larger, up to somewhere around 1,300. It's somewhere in that range. Our draft ordinance, of course, would limit to 1,300 square feet, 500 to 1,300 square feet. These are all apartments. Nobody owns fee simple title to their land. It's 100% rental. So this is coming around the outs. Now it's I'm leaving. I'm going on the. I'm leaving the development in this part of the video. I mentioned the common open space. The county does it a little bit differently than we do. They do it by unit. We do it by site, but the overall result is about the same. It's about 15 to 16%, and their common open space is can be a amenity center, like this thing, the structure on the right coming up. It's kind of an aqua color. That's their clubhouse, and behind it is their swimming pool area. That counts towards their common open space. They have additional lawn areas that can count towards open space. And as now we're leaving, there's a storage unit to the left of that house. That's what I was talking about. Everybody in that area must have access to a unit in that storage unit. And then we're on out towards the roadway out of the development. So that's our cottages. Dawn, there's another image in our folder. Can you look at that? It's the Owl Cottages image. It'll just give you a plan view of the development. Some of this I've shared. Do you see what I'm talking about, Dawn or Allison? It's back in the today's Planning Commission folder agenda.
I'm trying to locate it, Aaron.
Okay.
While Dawn's locating it, I have some concerns. Of course, this is on 7 acres, what we were just shown, with 99 units. I'm really still concerned personally about the minimum site size of 2.5 acres, as opposed to, let's say, 5 acres. I'm also concerned that only 15% is needed for open space, and I appreciate Suzanne's and the rest of the staff coming up with specifics as far as landscaping and so on. And I just think that if we're going to maintain the 15%, then we should not include in that 15% all the landscaping and so on, or we should raise it to 20%. I think it's an opportunity for us to take a really hard look at density. But that's me. I'm not speaking for any other commissioners.
Just to show everybody, that's the plan view of what we just went through in the video.
Okay. Harry?
Harvey, I agree with you. The more I think about this, I think the big problem is density. Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't know, and maybe Aaron, you could answer this, but one of the things that we need to look at too is whether or not this is going in a flood zone, because that changes the whole dynamic of the structures that are built. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is density. I think that, let me just ask you this, Aaron. If somebody was trying to do something that was not actually in one of the zoning districts, would they not go and apply to be like a PUD? Would that be the next step? If we weren't even going through all this to make a zoning district for something, would they not just go and want to do a PUD and then come specifically for what they wanted?
Right. So a PDD requires 2 acres minimum. Mm-hmm. So the site that we've looked at, the 2.79 acres, it would qualify as PDD. The obstacle, I guess, the challenge for the developer is to try to integrate mixed use into that residential product. At least that's that's a challenge with any PDD. You have to mix the use. There's also a considerable amount of additional review, of course, it's scrutinized
Right.
more as PDD than it would be as straight zoning. If the 2.5 acre, we just felt like if we're trying to, create an ordinance that would work across the board, but also, on this particular piece of property, we'd really be hard pressed to go more than 2.5 acres, given that it's a 2.79 acre site.
But I guess my question is are we creating an ordinance for a specific piece of property as
There you
opposed to
go, Harvey. You
creating
hit it,
an
right?
ordinance for North Myrtle Beach?
So I think you are, and you aren't. It's both, really.
You hit it, Harvey. That's it right there. That's my problem with it. It's,
Now,
it seems
right, and so it would benefit that individual property owner at 2.5 acres. There's another, of course, another interested party. We talked about that piece out by the park, Park Point, from Park Point. That's considerably larger than 2.5 acres. They could probably make a 5 acre minimum if you want to do something similar to what we already have in the ordinance now, the single family and common detached, and that's 5 acre minimum. And of course, a larger open space requirement, common open space requirement. So for the one, it wouldn't work, for the other, it would. The other thing to think about is if you don't like the idea of this small home on that 2.79 piece of property or any property under, say, 5 acres, then you have to be okay with what it's zoned as now, and it's zoned as RC, and you could have considerable amount of density. That's, of course, if they can get the financing and all that would work out. But I know you're concerned about the density, but it can be far more today. It's by right zoning right now.
Oh, I appreciate that, I guess, but I'm still hung up on density. I'm still hung up on 15%, not including certain things. Maybe we should, again, I'll reiterate what I said earlier, maybe we should make it 20%. This is a new ordinance. It's groundbreaking in a way. And it's going to affect the city of North Myrtle Beach for years to come. And maybe this is the opportunity to at least recommend to the city council that it should be no less than 20% or 15%, not including the things that Suzanne had brought up. But that's where I am. So I'll leave it to the rest of the commissioners to pipe in.
So let's run with that for just a sec, because I'm just thinking like, okay, so if the 15% common would remain, but it would not include the landscape. So for example, maybe it wouldn't include the perimeter buffer. It had to be in addition to the perimeter buffer.
I'm saying that, yeah, it would have to be in addition to.
Yeah.
That would make it
So-
closer to 20%.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how the rest of the commissioners feel about any of these things, I'm open.
Well, Harvey, I agree with you and Harry. The density is always a problem for me. It seems that we're trying to cram more and more homes into smaller parcels. So, anything we can do to give some sort of higher end separation of the structures, yeah, I'm all in favor. But before we leave that, I've got another question on paragraph G of the proposal, but let's go on with this discussion on this particular point.
Anyone else?
I agree as well. I still think we're in a position to follow the plans of the city, and I think the city wants to see more of that open space. So I agree.
I'm just thinking like if we did, there's, let's see,
How many units are planned on this particular parcel? Do you happen to know offhand?
I'm sorry,
How many units were planned? Just how many could be planned, I guess?
for the 2.79.
Yes, right.
Well, I guess the magic
Six.
number was around 50.
I
50,
think it was 60.
60?
Well, that's gross density. That's not what the property owner came to us and told us that what they needed for this to work. They needed more like 50. So with this, with the changes that we've made, I got somewhere in the ballpark in the upper 30s, lower 40s. So that's already affecting, that 50 unit number. And at a point, I don't know what his breaking point is, but at a point you go below a certain point and it's not feasible.
No, I
for them to go
understand.
forward. I gave everybody in an email, the rough calculation to figure out gross. And, you just take raw land and you subtract the 15% out of that, and then you get that, and then you divide it by the 1,800 square feet, and it yields a gross number. I mean, I can plug in 20% to see what that would, yield gross number. But again, it didn't include any of the road infrastructure.
No, I understand. And I appreciate it from a developer standpoint.
Yeah.
Don't misunderstand me,
Yes.
but I also have to look at it from a city standpoint.
I think if you ask me, and
Is it
we
gonna feel cramped? Is there gonna be cars parked out with the rear bumper out into the roadway? That's what I don't like. That's what I don't like to see. I don't want it to feel cramped. But then that's where the flood zones come into play, because most of the time, if something's in a flood zone, they build it elevated and then they park up under the house. And that gives you the feel of more open space, more elbow room, but if it's not in a flood zone, then that's where they just build 2 stories on the ground on a monolithic slab. And then the garage, they normally turn into a storage area and they park out front. And that's where it feels more cramped, more dense to me. So I think that's why I think that the, flood zones have a lot to play with how it's going to feel or how it's going to look. That's just my opinion.
Well, Harry, are you saying that we need some more detail on this proposal as far as floodplains parcels?
Well, I mean, the floodplain is going to play a major role in the look of the whole site, the whole project. That's going to determine what structures and how they build them. So it would be different from what we're looking at where Aaron was over in Carolina Forest. That's not in a flood zone. So that's why you see some on the ground and some elevated. And I don't want to single out a single site, but the flood zones are a big difference on, because if they can park up under the house and then leave that open area out front for guest parking, that's going to change a lot of the way it looks or the way it feels as far as the density.
You're saying you're saying that the building setback should be deeper off the street so that you can park at least one additional car in the driveway before it goes out into the public street.
Well, I mean, setbacks are normally, there's some places in like Heritage Shores up on 53rd Avenue. Those are 10-foot setbacks off the front, but they park up under the house. So, most of the time, all the homeowners park up under the house. And if they have a guest, there's 2 extra parking spaces before they hit the curbing, but if it was a monolithic slab, it just, I think that's a big impact on the site. Is it in a flood zone or is it not in a flood zone?
Well, of course, that just depends site to site. I don't,
Right,
I don't
right.
think we can regulate that in a code.
Right.
But I understand the end result, Harry, and what you're describing. I just think it's important to keep in mind that, you know, these aren't like single family homes. You know, these aren't like 10,000 square foot lots. I mean,
No, I
these are
understand.
small homes, and they're meant to be tight, and it's meant to be more dense than a single family detached development that I think a lot of people have in their minds of how parking cars ought to look. You know, we're
Right.
10 dwelling units an acre, give or take, right now.
Mhm.
You know, we're a block away from the beach in 2.76. Now it's different out in other spots, like we mentioned, that's not the exact case, but
Right.
you know, one of these areas that is being considered is there's a lot of density around it. And a lot of density has been approved in the past. So
Okay.
I think that's important to keep in mind.
Right.
I got a statistic for you too here.
Go ahead.
If we did, if you did 20% common open space,
Mhm.
just raw numbers, this is just gross, get around a half acre. This is on 2.79 piece. You get around a half acre of common open space. That's what 20%, it's at 24,306 square feet. So it yield about 54 dwelling units gross. And that doesn't, you know, and then you got to put in the roadways and the parking areas and, you know, your pools and all, you know, your clubhouse, which is likely going to occur. That number goes down significantly. That number I sent to you in the email was, I'll get it for you here in just a sec. Around 60. Yeah, it was around 60. So we've dropped around 6 units or so with the increase to bump up 20% common open space, and that's gross. So now if we're talking in the upper 30s, low 40s, 15% common open space, we're probably in the mid 30s to low 30s for the 20%. And that may be what y'all want. And the developer would either make a go of it or not, you know, but at least it's another option for them. I will say that however you guys decide on this, the additional language we put in there about elevating homes and they got, you know, wrapped and aesthetically pleasing, the increase in the addressing of the orientation of the street, of the homes on the perimeter to the primary streets, I think will go a long way towards helping to almost redefine some of the codes in North Myrtle Beach. That would be certainly a first. With primary access being to the rear, the front facades facing out towards the primary street. So as you look down that street, you're looking at a front facade of a home instead of the back rear of the home, or fanny, if you will. That would be a first. There's also some additional landscaping language we put in here to bulk up some of that previous language we put in. It had to do with layering and addressing more of the look of each of these areas that would be landscaped. So my point is, this ordinance, this draft ordinance, has a lot of code that is not currently in any code in North Myrtle Beach.
Right.
That would be a cool thing. It's just, you know, I just don't know how y'all feel about the minimum acreage. I don't think we can flex on that if we want to make this a go for everybody who's, you know, requesting it. Maybe it sounds like we could probably flex maybe on that common open space. Maybe that 20% is the common ground that we can all reach. Not everybody's happy, but maybe it could work for most.
How do the commissioners feel regarding this? Ruth Ann?
Minimum acreage, I have to agree with Harvey. 2.5 acres to me seems a little bit more difficult to deal with than the
Now, understand, whatever the commission decides, understand it goes to the city council. City council can tweak it, they can accept it, they can reject it,
Yeah.
Understand all this. And again, it's, from their standpoint, it's certainly political. I appreciate that, but we have to, as a group or individually, you have to decide, it's a new ordinance. What do you want in a new ordinance? Here's a chance to say, okay, we want it less dense, whether you agree or disagree with the 5 acres or the 2.79, whether you agree with 20% or 15%, not including certain things. Those are factors that, the commission has to take a look at. And tonight, when we come to the final vote, you can either accept it, reject it, accept it with conditions, reject it, and let the city council hash it over. But I think we have to have due diligence in at least this proposal. And again, I appreciate the staff coming up with the changes. I think did an excellent job based upon what the commissioners gave to you, Aaron and Suzanne and Dawn. And I think that's very important. But again, this is something you have to mull over this afternoon, and tonight when it comes to it, we'll just discuss it and vote. That's all I can say. That's right.
I've got some observations about this myself. I'm trying to think about what this proposed, let's say an example proposed subdivision using this proposed ordinance would look like in 20 years. And I'm kind of neutral about it, obviously, depends on how it's upkept and so forth. But the thing is, to me, when you go into a high density area, it doesn't seem as, let's say, upscale as something that is a subdivision that has less density to it, because I guess of the open space. So I agree with reducing density and increasing the open space. I agree with it wholeheartedly. I've still got 2 more points to deal with on paragraphs G and H on this, but let's finish up what we're talking about as far as.
You go ahead, Rocky.
Excuse me, this is Ruth Ann. I have a question. It's the acreage we have right now is 2.79 for the development that we're referring to at this point, right?
Correct.
Okay. And that, with all this other, the density and everything, I can appreciate that. But will this stop a lot of developers? Because where are you going to find 5 acres that a developer would want to build so that we can have, continue with our tourism? Because that is what we have here. What about the hotel that's going to be built on oceanfront next to the pier? What is that acreage? Isn't a Hampton Inn or something like that was supposed to be built up there in that parking lot? What is that?
Yeah, it's called Hampton Inn and Suites.
Right.
I don't know offhand, Mr. Dan. It's probably around that 2 acre number, but I can't be certain. We can find that out for you.
Right. So what I'm saying is we can't hold back our development, and we need to keep growing as a community. And I think this could cause a problem because it would be hard for a developer to come in or an investor. And we can cut back on the other. And I appreciate cutting back on the landscaping and all of the other, but we need to leave the acreage alone at this point, I feel. And that way it will keep continuing the growth of our community, because that's what we need to keep going, because it all trickles down to everybody's businesses here in North Myrtle Beach. Because I mean, what we're going through right now, And this could be, if we don't have any more growth, we'll be just like this possibly. And I think we need to really watch that. That's just my personal opinion, but I do think the acreage we need to leave alone at this time.
And that was something I wanted to get clarification on, because I thought that's why we decreased the acreage down to 2.5 acres to allow for more possibilities, since there isn't a ton of land available. Is that correct? That's why we made that decision to do that, right?
We initially proposed 2 acres, right? And then we increased it to 2.5 after the discussion. Because east of 17 to assemble 5 acres is much harder. To assemble 2.5 acres is not an easy feat. There are some examples, but that's why we put it at 2 and then increased it to 2.5.
And it has worked for us in North Myrtle Beach. I think that's where you guys thank you, staff and city council. You have kept this under control by having it at this. We don't want 5 acres. Can you imagine what kind of resort that would be? But this way you have control of it, which I appreciate what you guys do. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me just ask a quick, what's the density of like the existing Tillman condos that are across the street and on the oceanfront? I mean, I don't want to get very specific, but that seems to work very well for that area. Everybody parks up under it. There's a community pool, and I'm sure that the density would be even more. I mean, wouldn't you think there would be more units on those 3-story raised Tillman condos than what they're trying to do here?
Yes, just having stayed in one of those condos 1 year, it's pretty dense. I don't know offhand how many units. We would just need to figure out how many units in the acreage and then do some simple math.
But that seems to work good in that area there. I mean, it looks nice. I mean, I don't want to get too specific, but I think what's already around it works very well. But then you can go one street back towards 17 where and I forget the name of it, but there's there's a brick wall around it, and there's one way to drive into it there. And it's terrible in there. I had a friend that had one in there, and you could not, get in to the back units because of the parking conditions. I just thought I'd throw that out there, though.
Appreciate that.
Well, yeah, and I think so density doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? And with proper design, it can work, kind of like what you're saying, Harry. And if you like the idea of cottages that I took you through on that video, I think that's really similar to what we would see here on that 2.79 acre piece, probably elsewhere on the Park Point piece, anywhere else they wanted to try to do this. There are another. I prepared 4 additional images for you all of Seaglass cottages. If you needed to look at that, that's the one in Barefoot Resort. Now, it's more than 2.5 acres, but it would at least give you a plan view of the site, and we've looked at it before, as well as a couple of elevations, building homes that have been submitted for review. Just keep that in mind. If you want to look at them, we can grab them.
Well, I think, and Ruth Ann made a valid concern, and so did Jessica, regarding, excuse me, and by the way, that's just, I don't have a cough. I think,
Watch out, Aaron.
Get that close.
And I appreciate there are no 5-acre quote unquote sites that we can be looking at, and I'm willing personally to say, okay, I'll go with the 2.5 acres, but I really would like personally to decrease the density, whether it be the 20% or whether it be 15%, not counting all the other plantings and so on and so forth. But and I appreciate Ruth Ann and Jessica coming up with those comments. So
You're welcome. Thank you.
I feel like in terms of density, I like the idea of the tiny homes versus another tall condo type piece of property.
Right.
But
and
that's just my opinion.
When we
Um,
would do another resort, that's what we would get. And just think how many cars and people that would bring.
Right. I mean,
Yeah,
I think as long as, I mean, I like the idea of going up to 20% open space. I love all the landscaping that's been put in here. I like making sure that the houses that are built up are enclosed along the bottom. I think it could be really cute the way Aaron offered to make the houses facing major roads and have one entrance in and then an entrance out or whatever. I think there's a lot of really nice nice changes that we've made. And I just think that's what we need to think about is what do we really want on these properties? And kind of like, what's the lesser evil of them, is my opinion. That's kind of what I'll be thinking about.
Yeah.
And
I
think
I
it'd be
agree
nice to see something a little different,
No, I
Just-
agree. I agree.
This is Ruth Ann again. I agree with you on that because it does give us a uniqueness in our area and it's going to be right off of Main Street. And I think that's what makes it so nice too. It's not going to be the same thing. And that's what North Myrtle Beach is known as, being unique and special. And we want to keep it that way. And
right.
what is the acreage for oceanfront? Is it different than what we're talking about right now on Second Row or the PDD? Is that any different? I don't know, Jim, is that, I don't know. the answer to that.
No, ma'am, no, it's 2 acres anywhere in the city is the minimum for creation of a PDD.
2 acres is the minimum, okay, all right.
Is that Hampton? Okay, and you said it's about 2 acres. Both is 2, so this is maybe about 1.5, that's maybe a half.
Well, any other comments or
Uh,
questions?
One thing I can add,
Go ahead.
the question about Hampton Inn and suites in the acreage, that
Right.
Oceanfront Hotel would sit on just under 1 acre.
What?
Yeah, it's
Oh.
0.86 acres of is that oceanfront piece.
So oceanfront would be less than what we're trying to do now?
Yeah, by about a 1.5 acres less.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank
The total site, Hampton Inn and Suites, oceanfront, and second row parking garage, which will also accommodate parking.
Right.
That's right around 1.5. So you have that amount of density and 1.5 acres versus 2.5 and what we're talking about.
No, I understand.
Yeah, okay, great, thank
But
you.
they're gonna have a parking deck there. They're putting up enough money to accommodate parking.
Right.
There's a big expenditure there for the parking deck.
Well, couldn't we stipulate on this that they would have to have raised house, so you would have to park under the house? And then that would help with this, with the 2.79 acres?
The problem with that is, I mean, I'm not disagreeing. I think the problem is enforcement. I mean, we can say all we want about where you park, but it's still private and so on. I think that if we can agree on the acreage, and I'm willing to go along with that, but again, and then we have to decide as a commission or individually, whether you want to increase that to 20% or 15% plus the other type.
Right. And I know, we wanted to.
Yeah. After you want to talk about a couple of things before we call it a morning. Rocky?
Okay, I got a question about in paragraph G, the louvered walls having not less than 40% of the area. What's the basis for that? Is there something that we are basing that on, or is that just somebody's idea?
I mean, I'm not married to that percentage figure. I just thought to have at least, have light and air moving through those louvered walls, hence that percentage.
What about going to 50%? Would that make a big difference?
No, 50's fine.
Okay.
Where are you, Rocky?
Paragraph G, where it says louvered walls having not less than 40% of the area. I'm
Okay.
suggesting that we bump that up to 50%. I think that would look better.
You bet. Yeah, no argument there.
Okay.
Okay, and in paragraph H, I've got a question that lies a little bit outside that paragraph. What about parking? When you're talking about the perimeter housing on a parcel, and you want the housing to face the street outward with parking and access to the homes through a back alley or whatever. Is there going to be any problem with parking on the street by those residents?
Well, yeah, right now, unless it says otherwise, anybody can park on the street.
Right.
Public street. They could do it either way, technically, no matter how it was oriented.
Right.
Okay,
So, yeah.
Okay, so for example, on the Second Street parcel, if the perimeter homes were all facing, let's say, Second Street, I guess we would have to encourage the developer to do a sidewalking, curb, gutter, et cetera, off the main travelway, off the paved travelway on Second Street, for example. That would open up some additional parking for those residents. But would that also include or allow tourist parking in front of those homes too? And would that create a problem for us down the road as far as people living in those particular dwellings complaining about no parking available, even though they have parking behind the property?
So if I read you right, are you worried about parking on the street?
Yes.
Okay, so again, that could occur either way, unless it's signed that one can't park on the street, it would be legal. Sure. Now, if we want to try to get ahead of that, we can always have code to either encourage, or we could go one step further and require additional on-street parking be provided on those primary streets where the houses are oriented to that street. The front facade is oriented to that street. So you can imagine, like we've done on Main Street with Shops on Main, and they've along the roadway of Main, they put in upwards of 10 or so parallel parking spaces. Okay, that's legal parking for patrons that are going to go to Shops on Main. You could have something similar to that in this ordinance on these streets that we're talking about, the primary streets. Of course, we have to run that by Public Works and make sure that they were comfortable with that, but it happens elsewhere, and it seems to me to be a reasonable request.
Should that be mandatory or should that be suggested? Anybody's got any thoughts on that?
I don't have any problem making it mandatory. In fact, I don't have any problem with people parking on the street. I think it's a benefit to pedestrian safety as well as accessibility for users coming out of their cars to allow parking on the public street. I don't have any problem with that. That's
Yeah, and
if you want to make it mandatory.
well, the problem is that, you could have other businesses or other dwellings across the street. I mean, are they going to be allowed to park there?
Yeah, because you can't
deny.
regulate it.
No, you can't deny who can park where.
Right.
Yeah, you can't assign parking.
Right.
But if we
Now,
require,
beach goers parking there,
Right.
right?
Sure.
And I don't know how that then factors into our, public beach,
With a permit.
paper. Yeah, I don't know if those now become metered spots. Maybe they do.
I have a problem with that.
We we can run that, we can run that up to higher levels and see how that would shake out.
Right.
But again, like Main Street, Shops on Main is an example, we're doing it there.
Right. But I could park there and go across the street to the bank.
You could.
Well, and that's
Yeah.
fine.
You know, we're facing a massive parking problem in the city. And any way we can get some additional spaces, I'm all for. The only thing that I've got a question about is, could we legally require a developer to make off-site improvements, such as improving the right-of-way with curb gutter and parking spaces adjacent to the paved street?
Legally require, let's think about that. Okay, our zoning ordinance would not allow those spaces to be counted towards their required parking. That's number one. It's in excess of their required. And if I think about Main Street, Shops on Main, I don't think we made that mandatory. Suzanne, that was all voluntary, was it not?
It was part of the original PDD, so they left it, they wanted to keep that as close to the town center on Main, that aspect. And I wasn't here for those discussions for the town center on Main part.
So my recollection is the previous designer put those there as teaser parking. They like to call it teaser parking for the retail. It's not a lot of parking, but it provides the person driving by, oh, hey, I can get out here easily and then go and shop in those shops. Teaser parking. I think it was, I don't think it was mandatory. They came up with that.
I would say that parallel parking, there's places where it works well. I mean, it's going to depend on the roadway volume. It's going to depend on a lot of elements that, we're thinking about this one parcel, but we could use this anywhere in the city. So I would be a little worried to make it mandatory.
Well, and another factor, wouldn't it cut into the acreage we're talking about?
No,
Well,
not what I said.
It
No.
may, but it may also just require additional right-of-way dedication.
Oh, okay.
So it just extend, into the right-of-way. We do have cases where, like Main Street, where it exceeds the right-of-way, but then we have a public easement going atop of it that encroaches into the private, so that it's legal for, somebody from the public to step on that portion of the private property.
Yeah, I can see it as an option.
I think an option
I
would be the
don't
best
see a
way.
requirement personally.
Suzanne, I think raises a good point. It's an option. We would encourage it, but it would have to depend upon, Public Works review. And they look at roadway volume and that sort of thing.
Any other questions or comments? Rocky, you have any more on that?
No, that's all I have. Thank you.
Jessica, you had a question? By the way, Jessica, I don't know what you're eating, but it sure looked awful.
Sorry, I got hungry.
Okay. Any other questions?
I wanted to go back to, I feel like we were back and forth with the raised homes. And I just want to be clear on what the ideas were with that. I know some of you wanted to require that they all had to be raised. Did I hear that right? Or,
No, I don't think so.
okay.
If I were going to buy something on this particular acreage, I would definitely have to have a raised home because that's in the floodplain. But that's me.
Right, but keep in mind, these are all rentals.
Oh, these are all rentals.
Pretty much that's the market. There are no
Right.
fee simple lots,
Right.
no fee simple buildings.
Well, that's okay.
And for frankly, me, I mean, these wouldn't appeal to me and what I have going on with my family, but they must appeal to others.
Oh, I'm sure it could appeal to me, a single
It
individual,
could. Empty nesters.
Right, right.
professionals, young professionals, single parent
Right.
families, that sort of thing.
I had a question about G, because we were talking about moving that to 50%. So that would be requiring that 50% of the wall not be there.
Or in other words, open, right?
Open, which is not what you showed us in those images. That's maybe 5%.
So, right, so if you look back those images, in the video, to me, they enclosed the entire portion outside of that side wall, but they had on the inside louvered walls. That's, I think, what I saw. Was that right, or did you see something different?
From what I remember, it looked like 100% from the outside. Now I couldn't see clearly inside, but I know what you're saying. And
We're saying that the walls can be solid or they have to be open a minimum of 50%. It's just, it's a strange.
Yeah, I think that's putting a little bit too much, because if they're in a flood zone, that will dictate what they do. They will have to follow FEMA code. So, I mean, I don't think we should get into dictating how they have to design their specific units, honestly.
Well, okay, so, and we have that qualifying sentence at the last part of that, Harry, about, have to conform to flood zone. Flood hazard.
Right.
If we took out, solid walls, is it preference to have solid walls and have no sort of louvered wall at all? Or is the preference to have a solid wall with more opaqueness using a louvered wall? Is that
A louvered wall isn't going to give you 50% openness. You're going to have to do windows and doors. I mean, you
Oh,
basically have every other
Yeah.
board missing.
Got it.
Right. Yeah. Normally on those louvered walls, though, they have parking and stuff in them to where you still get a breeze through, but you get the
Right.
pollen and you get the dust. If you do a totally enclosed wall, you still can do that in a flood zone, but then they would have to put in
The vents, right, Harry? I think we lost Harry. I think what he's saying is you got to put in the flood vents.
Right.
Or it has to be breakaway. There's several different ways you can do, just depending on the flood zone too.
Right.
All right, so going off Suzanne's idea, raising that probably needs to be less than, it needs to be 40% or less, probably, right?
Yeah.
There's no way you can achieve a 50% louvered wall. That would make sense. So why don't we knock that down? My intent is to have, if y'all can see this, kind of like, nicely shuttered louvered, maybe that's 20%. Maybe that's more realistic, so that you can choose. You can have a solid wall, you can have those close together but open louvered walls, or you could have a combination of both.
Maybe just specify louvered walls may be used in place of or in addition to solid walls.
That's probably it. Not have any sort of percentage.
Right. That makes sense to me.
yeah, because you've got other
Restrictions. Right.
Sure. So, yeah, that's good. That's a good compromise, right?
Okay, I'll add that for the draft tonight.
Okay.
Maybe use in place of solid walls.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
So far, we got it still at 15%, or if you want to make it, bump it up to 20%, we could do that. I mean, we're not sure.
How do the rest of the commissioners feel?
I think
Let's
20%.
bump it up.
Bump it up?
Just say 20% coming up in space, and then
Yeah.
no further, not to include, just 20%.
Yeah, and include what you and Suzanne or Suzanne alone, talked about on the far as the landscaping goes. That to me will help.
So the compromise is bump it to 20, but then everything else can count towards it that has already counted
Right,
towards it.
because right now it's 15
Yeah.
and everything counts towards it. Right.
Okay. Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Again, thank you for Zooming, everyone. I wasn't sure my technological skills would work again. So didn't want to take a chance. So I'm here with handy wipes. I have a mask in here. And so we're ready to go for 5 o'clock this evening. Thank you again.
And
Thank you.
Terry's
Everybody
back.
have a great day.
All right.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Bye.
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 That worked out pretty well.
Yeah, good discussion.
Yeah, it was. Oh, very good.
Thank you.
And I'll be here at 5.
Yeah.